They seem the friendliest and most sociable of creatures. At least that's the impression you get when you watch killer whales swimming in wildlife documentaries or performing at marine parks. But don't be fooled.
The dawn light over San Diego Bay had just broken when Todd's 20-foot outboard boat hit open water. 5 miles out, the surface rippled, and 30 apex predators emerged from the dark. Not dolphins, but a massive pod of hunting orcas moving at terrifying speed. As the fisherman slammed the throttle, the massive creatures didn't fall behind. Instead, they launched their multi-ton bodies directly into the boat's wake, kicking off a high-speed chase that completely shattered the internet. They thought they were running for their lives, but they had no idea what these monsters actually wanted. The San Diego one-in-a-million chase. It was supposed to be just another Tuesday out on the water. Ben and Todd, two regular guys with a passion for spearfishing, pushed their 20-foot panga boat out into the Pacific from San Diego. The ocean was flat, glass-like, and quiet. 5 miles off the coast of Point Loma, they cut the engine to scout the area. That is when the horizon shifted. At first, it looked like a standard school of dolphins breaking the surface, a common enough sight in Southern California. But as the dark shapes sliced through the water toward them, the sheer size of the dorsal fins made their stomachs drop. These weren't dolphins. This was a massive, coordinated pod of roughly 30 wild orcas, and they were heading directly for the small, open-hull fishing boat. Panic is a funny thing. It hits you in waves. For Ben and Todd, the realization that they were floating in a tiny fiberglass shell right above 30 of the ocean's most ruthless apex predators triggered an instant, primal survival instinct. Todd slammed his hand onto the throttle, the outboard motor roared to life, and the boat began to haul across the water. In any standard wildlife encounter, a loud smoking engine is enough to scare an animal away. But not this time. The moment the boat accelerated, the orcas matched their speed effortlessly. What followed was a heart-stopping, high-speed pursuit that looked less like a nature documentary and more like an unreleased scene from a Hollywood thriller. Ben pulled out his phone, his hands shaking as he pointed the camera over the stern. The footage he captured is pure, unadulterated adrenaline. In the video, multiple multi-ton killer whales can be seen trailing mere inches from the boat's propeller, launching their massive black and white bodies entirely out of the water, crashing down into the foam and surging forward again. The sheer power on display was staggering. A single misstep by the driver, a sudden engine stall, or a rogue wave could have tossed the fisherman directly into the path of the pod. The audio of the clip captures the psychological terror of the moment perfectly. You can hear the frantic wind whipping against the microphone, punctuated by the breathless, terrified shouts of the two men. "I'm really scared he's going to bite my arm off," Ben yells at one point, his voice cracking under the weight of genuine fear. As another massive orca breaches right in their wake, spraying ocean water onto the deck, he screams, "Dude, they're chasing us! Go, go, go! Faster, Todd!" The whales weren't just swimming alongside them. They were diving underneath the hull, surfacing on either side, and tracking the boat's every turn like guided missiles. To the men on board, it felt like a coordinated hunt. They believed they were witnessing the final moments of their lives, waiting for the inevitable impact that would capsize their small vessel. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity of high-speed maneuvering, the boat managed to outrun the pod's immediate focus, or rather, the orcas simply lost interest. Ben and Todd made it back to the San Diego marina, drenched in sea spray, hyperventilating, but entirely physically unharmed. They had the story of a lifetime, and more importantly, they had the digital proof to back it up. When Ben uploaded the raw, vertical footage to social media, they had no idea they were about to detonate an internet bomb. Within 24 hours, the clip escaped the local California fishing forums and shattered the global algorithm. It racked up millions of views across YouTube, TikTok, and X, formerly Twitter. News networks picked it up globally, running the footage on primetime loops with breathless anchors debating what had just occurred. Thousands of viewers, conditioned by decades of monster movies and sensationalized media, viewed the footage as definitive proof of an aggressive aquatic uprising. People wrote essays in the comments about how the oceans were finally healing and that the apex predators were starting to hunt humans in retaliation for overfishing and pollution. To the casual scroller, the video was a terrifying reminder of how helpless humans are when stripped of our land-based technologies. The visual of a tiny, fragile boat being systematically pursued by 30 massive calculating killers tapped deep into our ancient, evolutionary fear of the deep, dark sea and the things that live within it. On the other side of the digital aisle, marine biology enthusiasts and amateur oceanographers tried desperately to inject some nuance into the chaotic discourse, pointing out that the whales didn't actually harm the boat. But their voices were initially drowned out by the sheer algorithmic velocity of the panic. The viral success of the video proved one thing: nothing captures human attention quite like the threat of nature striking back. For a solid week, Ben and Todd's terrifying morning commute was the most talked-about piece of media on Earth, leaving millions of people wondering how two guys in a tiny boat managed to escape a pod of killer whales completely unscathed. What the screaming fishermen didn't realize in the heat of the moment was that they hadn't stumbled into a feeding frenzy. They had accidentally started a game. The wake surfers of California. Play versus terror. To get why Ben and Todd's video broke the internet, you have to look at the massive gap between what the human brain thinks is happening during a predator encounter and what is actually happening in the mind of the animal. When a human sees a 20-foot, 6-ton killer whale surging through the water at 30 miles per hour directly behind a small fiberglass boat, our evolutionary programming screams one word: hunting. We are land mammals. When something big, fast, and armed with a mouth full of interlocking conical teeth chases us, we assume we are on the menu. But the reality of this specific California encounter introduces us to one of the most fascinating, mind-bending paradoxes in the entire animal kingdom. The orcas weren't trying to kill the fishermen, they were using them as a giant, motorized toy. To fully grasp this behavior, we have to look at the physics of a boat hull moving through water. When an outboard motor spins at high revolutions, it doesn't just push the boat forward. It violently churns the ocean, creating a massive, turbulent trail of white water known as a stern wake. For a highly intelligent, sensory-driven marine mammal, this wake is essentially an aquatic playground. When orcas line up perfectly behind a speeding boat, they are engaging in a highly specialized behavior known as wake surfing or bow riding. From a mechanical standpoint, wake surfing is incredibly efficient for the whale. As the boat pushes through the ocean, it generates a moving wave of pressurized water. By positioning their massive bodies directly into the sweet spot of this wave, the orcas can actually utilize the boat's kinetic energy to propel themselves forward. It is a hydrodynamic phenomenon called drafting. The forward momentum of the boat's displacement wave pushes the whale along, meaning the orca can travel at incredibly high speeds while expending a fraction of the physical energy it would normally take to swim that fast. It is the exact same principle that human surfers use when riding a wave, or that stock car drivers use when tailgating each other on a racetrack to reduce wind resistance. But efficiency is only half the story. The real reason a pod of 30 orcas will go out of their way to stalk and chase a fishing vessel comes down to pure, unadulterated fun. Marine biologists who study cetacean behavior have long noted that the turbulent, oxygenated water produced by a spinning propeller provides intense physical and sensory stimulation for the whales. The rushing bubbles create a tactile sensation against their sensitive skin, acting almost like a high-powered hydromassage. Furthermore, orcas are hyper-intelligent, highly social creatures with massive brains that require constant cognitive stimulation. In a vast, empty ocean, a fast-moving boat creating a loud noise and a massive, frothing wave is the ultimate curiosity. It is the marine equivalent of a laser pointer to a house cat or a tennis ball to a golden retriever. They chase it because it is an interactive, high-speed game that breaks up the monotony of their day. This brings us to the great predator paradox. How can an animal that is capable of unmatched, calculated violence be completely harmless to a couple of terrified guys in a small boat? So we can fully grasp this, you have to look at the specific types of orcas that frequent the waters off the coast of California. Orcas are not a monolith. They are divided into distinct populations known as ecotypes. The orcas featured in the viral San Diego video are typically categorized as either Eastern Tropical Pacific orcas or Biggs transient orcas. Make no mistake, these specific ecotypes are absolute monsters when it comes to hunting. They do not eat fish or nibble on kelp. They are specialized apex predators that hunt warm-blooded marine mammals. A standard day for a transient orca pod involves tracking down a hundreds of pounds California sea lion, coordinating an attack to isolate it, and using their massive tails to launch the animal 30 feet into the air to stun it before dragging it under to drown. They are capable of tracking down gray whale mothers migrating up the California coast, systematically separating the newborn calf from its mother, and drowning a creature twice their size through sheer endurance and tactical brilliance. They are the undisputed rulers of the Pacific Ocean. They have even been documented hunting and killing great white sharks just off the coast of San Francisco, ripping out their nutrient-rich livers with surgical precision. Yet, despite possessing the physical capability to crush a 20-foot outboard boat like an aluminum soda can, and despite having the hunting prowess to wipe out the apex predators of the shark world, wild orcas draw a hard, definitive line when it comes to humans. This is not an opinion. It is a historical, statistical fact. In the entire recorded history of human civilization, there has never been a single verified case of a wild orca hunting, attacking, and killing a human being in the ocean. Let that sink in. We have thousands of years of maritime history, thousands of daily interactions between divers, surfers, fishermen, and scientists, and the wild fatality count sits at an absolute zero. Why? Why do they systematically choose not to eat us? Biologists believe it comes down to their incredibly rigid, culturally transmitted diets. Orcapods do not just hunt by instinct. They are taught what to eat by their mothers and elders. If a specific food source is not part of their ancient cultural lineage, they generally do not recognize it as prey. To a California transient orca, a human being sitting in a boat doesn't smell like a sea lion, doesn't move like a whale calf, and doesn't fit into the mental catalog of things that are food. Furthermore, their echolocation capabilities are so advanced that they can scan through the fiberglass hull of a boat and map out the human skeleton inside, recognizing us as an entirely different, non-marine entity. When Ben and Todd were screaming for their lives, dodging multi-ton bodies leaping out of the water, they were experiencing a profound clash of realities. They were trapped in a state of primal terror, fully believing that the ocean's greatest killers were closing in for the slaughter. In reality, they were merely acting as the drivers for a 30-member roller coaster ride, providing a free, high-speed wake for a group of incredibly intelligent animals who just wanted to play tag in the surf. If wild orcas are so inherently peaceful toward humans, how do we explain the literal maritime war zone currently developing on the other side of the planet? The global outbreak, submarines, rudders, and orca cultural fads. While the fishermen in California were dealing with what turned out to be a harmless, high-speed game of tag, sailors on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean were waking up to a literal maritime war zone. If you think the San Diego chase was intense, what has been happening in the waters of Europe over the last few years will completely blow your mind. Around the Iberian Peninsula, specifically along the coasts of Spain, Portugal, and the narrow bottleneck of the Strait of Gibraltar, a localized population of orcas has stopped merely surfing behind boats. Instead, they have actively begun dismantling them. The phenomenon began rather abruptly in May of 2020. Up until that point, sailors in the Mediterranean and Atlantic shared a peaceful, symbiotic relationship with local pods. But within a matter of months, skipper after skipper began reporting bizarre, highly coordinated ambushes. The playbook used by these whales is chillingly systematic. A pod will silently approach a sailboat from behind, entirely ignoring the humans on deck. They won't breach, they won't play, and they won't surf the wake. Instead, they dive straight for the stern, and focus all of their multi-ton physical power onto a single critical piece of engineering: the fiberglass or carbon fiber rudder. The whales will ram the rudder, bite it, and twist it with their jaws until the steering mechanism violently snaps off, leaving the vessel completely disabled and drifting helplessly in open water. Once the rudder is destroyed, the orcas lose all interest and simply swim away into the dark. What started as an isolated weird occurrence quickly escalated into a full-blown crisis. Over the next several years, hundreds of these interactions were officially logged by maritime authorities. In several extreme cases, the structural damage inflicted on the hulls by these relentless aquatic strike teams was so severe that the sailboats actually took on water and sank to the bottom of the ocean. Naturally, the international media went into an absolute frenzy. The internet, desperate for a good villain arc, immediately anthropomorphized the behavior. Tabloids dubbed the matriarch of the pod White Gladys, spinning a highly dramatic narrative that she had been traumatized by a collision with a fishing boat in her past and was now leading an army of vengeful killer whales on a calculated anti-capitalist rebellion to reclaim the oceans from human tourism. It is a fantastic storyline for a movie, but marine biologists studying the Iberian pod dug into the data and found a reality that is far more fascinating and, honestly, far weirder than a simple revenge plot. This isn't an act of war, it is a manifestation of orca culture. So how does a behavior like boat dismantling spread across an entire region? Well, you have to realize that orcas are among the very few non-human animals on Earth that possess true non-genetic culture. Their behaviors are not entirely dictated by hardwired survival instincts. Instead, they possess highly developed brains capable of social learning, emulation, and the transmission of tribal knowledge from generation to generation. When an orca discovers a new behavior, it doesn't keep it to itself. It teaches it to its peers, and if the behavior catches on, it spreads through the population like wildfire. In the scientific community, these behavioral trends are officially classified as cultural fads. And just like human fads, whether it's a viral TikTok dance, a fashion trend, or a silly high school craze, orca fads often have absolutely no practical survival purpose. They do them simply because one influential individual started doing it, and the rest of the group decided it was the cool new thing to do. If you think the rudder-smashing trend is bizarre, the history of cetacean research is filled with even more hilarious examples of orcas jumping onto ridiculous behavioral trends. The most famous historical example occurred in the summer of 1987 in the Puget Sound region of Washington state. Out of nowhere, a female orca belonging to the southern resident K-pod killed a dead chum salmon, flipped it up onto her snout, and swam around balancing it on her head like a bizarre, scaly hat. For reasons that no human scientist will ever truly comprehend, the other whales in her pod looked at her and apparently thought it was the height of fashion. Within a matter of weeks, the salmon hat trend went viral across the entire regional population. Orcas from 3 completely distinct pods, J, K, and L pods, were spotted traveling through the Pacific Northwest actively hunting salmon, not to eat them, but to wear them as dead fish toupees. The trend dominated the entire summer of '87, and then, just as quickly as it started, the fad completely died out. By the following summer, wearing a salmon on your head was completely out of style, and no orca was ever seen doing it again. When you view the terrifying rudder attacks of Europe through the lens of the 1987 salmon hat craze, the mystery starts to unravel. Marine scientists believe that a juvenile orca in the Iberian pod likely started playing with a sailboat rudder out of sheer curiosity, realizing that the moving part offered a satisfying physical resistance when pushed. Because juvenile orcas are hyper-reactive and easily bored, the activity quickly turned into a highly addictive game. They taught the game to their friends, and suddenly, disabling European maritime traffic became the hottest new sport in the Atlantic. Whether they are launching themselves into a fisherman's wake in San Diego, wearing dead fish as accessories in Washington, or systematically snapping off fiberglass rudders in the Strait of Gibraltar, it all points to an uncomfortable, humbling truth. We are not sharing the oceans with mindless, instinct-driven monsters. We are sharing the planet with an alien intelligence that possesses its own societies, its own languages, its own traditions, and its own completely unpredictable pop culture trends. Whether they are wearing fish as fashion or dismantling European sailboats, it all points to an uncomfortable truth. These creatures possess an intelligence that mirrors our own. The minds of monsters, societies under the surface. To truly understand how an animal can shift effortlessly between a high-speed game of tag with a fishing boat in San Diego and a systematic tactical ambush in the Mediterranean, you have to stop looking at them as fish. Orcas are mammals, but more importantly, they are cognitive giants. If we want to understand the source of their bizarre, unpredictable behavioral trends, we have to look directly inside their skulls. The average human brain weighs about 3 pounds. The brain of a healthy adult killer whale weighs a staggering 15 pounds. But evolutionary neuroscience tells us that raw size isn't the only metric that matters. It is how that massive neurological highway is wired that makes the orca one of the most intellectually complex entities to ever exist on Earth. When neuroscientists have mapped the brains of deceased cetaceans, they have discovered something that completely shatters our understanding of animal intelligence. Orcas possess an incredibly dense, hyper-developed area of the brain known as the paralimbic system. In humans, the paralimbic system is the neural network responsible for processing complex, nuanced emotions, navigating intricate social hierarchies, forming deep tribal bonds, and managing long-term memory. In the orca brain, this exact system has expanded to a degree that far surpasses human anatomy. Their paralimbic lobes are structurally folded and deeply interconnected with their cerebral cortex in ways that ours are not. What does this mean in plain English? It means that orcas do not just experience emotions, they experience a depth of social connection and emotional nuance that humans might not even be capable of fully comprehending. An orca does not view itself as an isolated individual wandering an empty ocean. Its entire sense of identity is fundamentally hardwired into the fabric of its pod. They are connected by unique regional dialects, vocal languages that vary so drastically between different pods that a killer whale from the Pacific Northwest cannot understand the vocalizations of a killer whale from the coast of Iceland. They have distinct cultural rules, localized dietary preferences, and multi-generational mourning rituals where mothers will carry deceased calves for weeks, supported by the quiet, grieving presence of their entire family unit. This hyper-advanced social framework is exactly why a wild orca looks at a human being and chooses not to attack. They possess the cognitive capacity to distinguish between an ecosystem threat and a curious land mammal. Their echolocation, a biological sonar system so precise it can map the internal organs of a target through a solid barrier, allows them to look at a human sitting inside a fiberglass boat and recognize us as something completely separate from their marine world. They understand what we are, they calculate our movements, and they consciously choose to interact with us in terms of mutual curiosity rather than predatory violence. In the open ocean, the wild orca exists in a state of emotional and psychological equilibrium, stabilized by the vastness of their territory and the profound depth of their family structures. But this brings us to the darkest, most terrifying chapter of the human-orca relationship, the tragic reality of captivity. If you want to understand how dangerous an orca can truly become when its highly advanced mind is broken, you have to look at what happens when we remove them from the wild and lock them inside concrete tanks. Throughout modern history, while the wild fatality rate between humans and orcas has remained a flawless absolute zero, the story inside marine theme parks tells a radically different, violent story. Dozens of serious attacks, mutilations, and multiple high-profile human fatalities have occurred within the walls of commercial aquariums. The most notorious example in history is Tilikum, a massive 12,000-pound bull orca captured off the coast of Iceland in 1983 and housed at SeaWorld. Over his decades in confinement, Tilikum was directly involved in the tragic deaths of 3 separate human beings including his veteran trainer, Dawn Bruncho, in a horrific, highly publicized public attack in 2010. The media immediately tried to paint Tilikum as a vicious rogue monster, a true killer whale. But marine psychologists and documentary filmmakers quickly exposed the underlying truth. Tilikum wasn't a monster. He was a victim of profound, long-term psychological destruction. Imagine taking a nomadic, hyper-intelligent animal that is genetically programmed to swim up to 100 miles a day in open water, interact with a complex social network of 40 family members, and surf the massive wakes of ocean currents, and trapping it inside a sterile, chlorinated concrete box for 30 years. In captivity, these acoustic animals are subjected to severe sensory deprivation. The sound waves of their own vocalizations bounce off the flat concrete walls, driving them effectively insane. They are torn away from their mothers at young ages, mixed into unnatural artificial pods where they cannot speak the same dialect as the other captive whales, and subjected to violent, systematic bullying from frustrated tank mates. The result of this extreme confinement is a psychological phenomenon known as captivity-induced psychosis. The stress, chronic boredom, and emotional trauma literally warp the animal's massive paralimbic system. The playful, curious predator that would normally chase a fisherman's boat for a harmless adrenaline rush transforms into a deeply depressed, hyper-aggressive creature suffering from severe mental illness. The attacks in captivity are not hunting behaviors. They are explosive, psychotic breaks from animals that have been driven mad by a human entertainment industry. When we look back at the video of Ben and Todd fleeing the pod of 30 orcas off the coast of San Diego, or when we look at the sailors watching their rudders get snapped off in Spain, we are looking at an animal that is fully alive, mentally intact, and entirely free. The panic we feel when they approach our boats is a reflection of our own insecurity as land mammals stepping into an environment where we are no longer at the top of the food chain. But the true lesson of these viral encounters is one of profound humility. The wild orca is a majestic, emotionally complex, and intellectually advanced sovereign of the sea. They do not want to destroy us, nor do they exist to entertain us in concrete amusement parks. They are simply living out their own ancient, mysterious lives. One high-speed wave, one cultural fad, and one breathtaking ocean chase at a time. AI, orca apps, and the coexistence era. As these viral encounters escalate from California to Europe, the human response is shifting away from primal fear and toward an era of high-tech coexistence. We are no longer just capturing these moments on accidental smartphone footage. We are actively using technology to adapt to them. In the Strait of Gibraltar, sailors have developed crowdsourced mobile apps like GT Orcas, where mariners use real-time GPS tracking to flag recent pod sightings. If a sailboat captain sees a group of killer whales acting playfully or aggressively near a harbor, they drop a digital pin, allowing nearby vessels to alter their routes and steer clear of a potential rudder-smashing incident. Furthermore, marine scientists are now turning to artificial intelligence and underwater acoustic monitoring systems. By deploying arrays of hydrophones, underwater microphones, along highly trafficked coastlines like San Diego and the Mediterranean, AI algorithms can instantly detect the highly specific dialects of local orca pods the moment they approach coastal waters. This data doesn't just protect boats, it protects the whales from hazardous container ships and propeller injuries. The viral video of Ben and Todd was a snapshot of a time when human-orca interactions felt like an unpredictable anomaly. Today, it is clear that as whale populations recover from decades of industrial hunting and human interference, our paths will cross more frequently than ever before. The future of the ocean isn't about dominant land mammals conquering wild predators or wild monsters driving humans off the water. It is about utilizing global, real-time data to share the blue planet with an intelligence that we are only just beginning to truly understand. Our oceans are changing, and the rules of the deep are being rewritten by the planet's smartest predators. The only question left is, are we ready to share the water? If you want to dive deeper into the wild, hit subscribe and leave your thoughts below.